Welcome back to Beautiful Work, Beautiful Life. Hi, Laurel. How are you today?
I'm well. How are you today?
I'm doing well. I hope our friends out there in podcast world that are listening in with us are doing well too. I was thinking about our recording for today and our topic, and um, was thinking about how we're actually, really making efforts to do what we're going to talk about today with our podcast community. So, without further ado, I will introduce our topic on that. And our topic today is how do you build trusting relationships? And I know that we really want to have a trusting relationship with our podcast listeners and friends out there. And we do that. Let's just talk about the podcast first and foremost. Like, how are we doing that, right? We're showing up when we say we're showing up. We're talking
Yes,
about what we say we're going to talk about.
absolutely.
We're aligned with, ourselves on what it is we want to do. We trust ourselves to do it well. And we keep working at it to get better and better.
And it's authentic. We show up
Just as we are.
just as we are. And this is what I love about what we're doing in this podcast. It's raw, unscripted, real time.
Yeah. Yeah. And we rely on the fact that we, trust ourselves as life coaches and seasoned practitioners of the inner work, shall we say, and that we can just speak into the topic and do a good job with it, right? So,
Yes.
how do we build trusting relationships right off the bat? First, let's see, bullet point that we would get to, right? If we're doing it in bullet point form, would be we have to trust ourselves.
I think that is the foundation
Yeah.
of trusting relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if you don't trust yourself, right, you're always wondering. You're always wondering about the other person because you can't, it's hard to relax into, I don't trust myself to choose the right people, right? As soon as you trust yourself implicitly, you trust that you pick the right people and you can set the boundaries you need to set with wherever you are in those relationships with them.
Yes. And when you trust yourself and you're not worried about how you're being received,
Yeah.
right? Trusting yourself allows you to be more open to the other person,
Yeah.
right? I think, when we trust ourselves, we're better listeners.
Yeah.
We're better at creating safety for another person.
Yeah.
We show up without judgment when we trust ourselves.
Yeah.
And those things are really critical for relationships.
Yeah. For a healthy,
Yes.
intimate, close and authentic relationship, all of those things are required. So I want to talk about the pathway to trusting yourself because I feel like sometimes it feels like it can be so complicated. And I think we overcomplicate this one. I think this one is pretty straightforward. And I think that trusting yourself comes from doing what you're saying you're going to do.
That definitely, right? The accountability of being true to your word. I mean, we talked about that last summer when we were doing our book circle on the 4 agreements, right? Being impeccable with your word and doing what you say you're going to do. Yeah. And if you change your mind, then say that out loud. And right, it doesn't mean that you cannot do anything different once you speak it or commit to it. It means being true to and following through with what you said you were going to do.
Yeah. And then doing it all in alignment with your values. I think is the next kind of layer of it. What about you? Where
I was going to go is knowing yourself. When you think about trusting yourself and being true to your word or following through with what you say you're going to do, if you still don't know yourself well enough and you're driven by outside acceptance, I'll say, then oftentimes we are on a path that we can't, or we're uncomfortable doing or following through with what we said we were going to do because our motive isn't correct, maybe, and maybe that's alignment. Maybe that's what you were talking about too, that when we know ourselves, that our actions are easy because they're true to ourselves. We're not sacrificing ourselves. We're not compromising ourselves. We're not abandoning or neglecting ourselves.
Yeah.
And we can't stay true to ourselves unless we know ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I think knowing ourselves, and then, the layer on that is knowing yourself and accepting yourself and loving yourself ultimately, because I know, when I think back kind of to, I don't know, maybe like my formative time of looking around and thinking, I'm not really one of the in crowd, like in high school, middle school, even I can even remember being on the playground and looking around and thinking, I'm not in these little groups, like, and I think rather than it being like a problem for me, I think what I did with it was think, I wondered if I really wanted to be in those groups. Like I trusted my instinct to look at them and say, do I need to be in that group? Do I want to be in that group? Am I okay just being me, and not being in a group? I think we've gotten so like, with all the Instagramming and social media and stuff, like so many visuals, like of all this stuff of like fitting in or being in a group or being like the coach of the year, whatever it is, right? It's like, can you just be okay being who you are? Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 And then, when you think about the more that you can show up being authentically you, being who you are, that helps build self-trust right there.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah.
You're aware of who you are and what you need, right? What your values are. And you maybe are true to your word that you're not going to compromise yourself or neglect yourself, abandon yourself for the sake of others.
Yeah.
And you start showing up that way.
Yeah.
You're building trust. You're exercising your trust muscle, right?
Yeah.
Because it becomes almost second nature when you do it, and you learn how to do it well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Either you find yourself in safe situations where it's okay to be yourself, or you find yourself in situations where you decide the situation isn't for you because you can't be yourself, right? And those acts really are a way to build your own self-trust.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then taking it even further and trusting in the relationships, when you find yourself in a place that you can be yourself, you trust people, right? You're connected with them deeply.
Yeah.
And then when you find yourself that maybe that group or that situation isn't for you, you begin to trust those people that they'll understand if you need to speak, that it's not for you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And if they don't, that you're okay.
Yes.
That it doesn't mean, there's something wrong with you. It just means they don't get it. And that's
Right.
okay too. They don't
Right.
have to, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the other thing that I've learned, through trusting myself, right? Is some people will get me and some people won't. Some people will understand, some people won't. And it's okay if they don't. It doesn't mean that I have to make them understand or even care if they don't understand. It's okay if they don't. You know what I mean? Like we just think about the amount of time it would consume in our days if we tried to make everybody understand everything that we said about everything, right? It's like it would be exhausting. And so, to just allow ourselves to move through the world with more ease and grace. Part of that is just being authentic, being honest in your relationship. So how do we build trusting relationships? So first and foremost, right, we talk about this trust in ourselves, right? And that's it being true to your word, right? And then really being honest in your word, right? And showing up and saying your honest truth, which isn't always the easiest thing to do.
But I think you were onto something when you said, trusting that it's okay if someone else doesn't get it. It's
Yeah.
okay that you're going to be okay, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, a simple example of this is, you know, when my husband, for instance, will say, "Oh, let's go here for dinner," and it's a restaurant that I don't particularly care for.
Mm.
You know, years ago, I probably would have just gone along with it,
Yeah.
knowing he liked it. Now I say, that is not my favorite place. I'd like to go here instead, right?
Yeah.
And as simple as that sounds, it's not always easy. Especially, the recovering people pleaser, the accommodator, all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
But it is true that if I find myself year after year, day after day, doing things that I'd rather not, it really erodes trust in myself.
Self-trust. Yeah. Right. Right.
You know, it
Exactly.
it 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 creates resentment, right? And so it's interesting to be able to think about the reasons why it's important that that we each maintain that level of trust with ourselves and in our relationships with other people, that they're going to at least acknowledge what we need and want.
Yeah. Yeah. So coming back to this, like what we need and want. And I think that, um, there was kind of this period of time where we were looking like for one relationship that was going to fulfill all the things. And well, hallelujah to anybody who has that in their relationship. That's all I want to say is if you really authentically do, wow, cool, and you're also in a tiny percent of the world relationship stats, shall we say, because the reality is like one relationship doesn't fulfill all our needs and wants. And that's the beauty of, having a circle of people in your life, having a community, having a friendship circle, having, a family, right? Like, the family that you choose, not the one that you're necessarily born into, right? Like this is the beauty of having a fulfilled life, is finding the relationships that allow you to express all of who you are in all the different ways. And going out to eat is it's a great example of, we don't all like the same food, right? I like to go there with my husband, but I would never go there with my daughter. And I always like to go there with my daughter, but I would never go there with my husband because she and I like that food. He and I like that food. And it's not, you know what I mean? Like, and so
Yes.
it's the smorgasbord of everything, food is just an example. Conversation is another one, what you like to do for recreation, what you like to read, whatever. There's all the stuff, Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so how do you trust yourself and then, others that you're in relationship with, that they, do you think that your trust for yourself influences how others trust you?
Yes. Yes, I do. Because I think that, I think when you trust yourself, you usually are really centered in yourself, and you tend to have more clarity because you're aligned, with who you are. You're doing what you say you're going to do. Um, and, and then, people feel that, literally feel that vibration, right? It feels safe to be with you. What they expect is how you show up, right?
Yes. Oh, the
Yeah.
question I want to ask next.
Yeah.
What if being true to yourself has you showing up different than someone expects?
Yeah, right. So we're going to do a whole episode on handling disappointment and
Yes.
relationships, right?
Yes.
And the reason we're going to do a whole episode on that is because the question you're asking is really, that's what this is about, right? Is being okay disappointing other people and being disappointed, right?
Yes.
And somebody
Yes.
just being who they are.
Yes. And I think it's a perfect, kind of segue from this conversation about trusting yourself and trust in relationships. Like, how do you develop trust in relationships? To know that disappointment happens
Mm-hmm.
And trusting yourself means, one, you can handle it.
Yeah.
Two, you can choose relationships that are in alignment with you, with your values, with yourself,
Yeah.
and let go of relationships that are no longer aligned, right?
Yeah.
If you're in a relationship that you find yourself unable to trust yourself, then maybe it's you really need to look at that relationship. Like, what is it about the relationship that is not in alignment with what I need?
Right, right. And it goes back to that if you're not showing up authentically, or you don't feel like you can show up authentically any longer, or
Yes.
at all, or never did, right? Is really doing the introspective work of saying, what am I really doing then? I mean, why am I in this relationship? And how is it serving them? How is it serving me? And was this really the right way to handle this going forward? Because I
Yeah.
think you lose trust in yourself. If you stay in relationships and you don't feel like you're being your authentic you do lose trust in yourself to be able to use your authentic voice as you need to, as you want to on a regular basis. And that's
Yes.
big. Yeah.
Or even the word protect was coming up, but protect your own values, right? And your choices. When I think about that, if you have to sacrifice or neglect yourself in lieu of the relationship, it's really a telltale sign that it's not a trusting relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think so this is it. So it's interesting. I had made a note about, before our podcast, because I was like, okay, what are the things that I really want to hit on? And I knew that we would naturally come into the two topics we did, which is trusting ourselves. How do you build trust in yourself? Then using your authentic voice, which is really being true to your word and aligned there, right? And the other thing that came up for me like so loud and strong, and I feel like is so important, and I feel like you and I are gonna dish on this a little bit, Laurel, here, okay? And that is that you need to grow up.
Tell me more, please.
That you need to grow up, and that you need to look for grown-ups in relationships. Like if you're gonna have a trusting relationship, like you're gonna really feel like you're in a relationship where you can relax, trust the other person, use your authentic voice. Like, I think it takes a grown up to do this, or somebody who has, come from an amazing background where it was just okay to be honest, and everybody was honest and forthright in their house growing up, and they were encouraged to do so, and they really had it conditioned into them that that's how you show up in relationships, right? And so you just do it, because I do feel like if you're going to take responsibility for being who you really are and being true to your word, that's a grown up responsibility in every single moment, in every word that you utter, and in every way that you show up in that relationship.
Yes. And when you were saying, grow up, you have to be a grown up, what was coming through for me was responsibility. There
Yeah.
is great responsibility in being in relationship.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that responsibility is a responsibility to yourself and
Yeah.
to the other people, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
the other person that you're in relationship with. And it is a disservice to both ourselves and the other if we can't show up who we are authentically, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And if you can't, you want to look at what, I mean, there's actually some inner child work there to do. If we talk about this grown up, being a grown up in relationship, right? If you can't really be yourself fully and you're not authentically showing up, being in alignment, with your truth and your word, right? Your inner child is in there, trying to figure out how to manage the situation, how to not be seen completely or whatever it is, right? And so to use that almost as a marker, if you feel like you aren't being honest in all relationships, right? Or there's relationships that you're really managing in that way, is like being able to look at that, use that for yourself. So this could be a journaling question, right? is if that's where you are, right? If you have relationships that you're in that you don't trust completely, or you feel like you lack a fully trusting relationship, right? Look at, where you're not being completely authentic. And then you want to start asking your inner child, like yourself as a child, right? Is why are you hiding the real you? What's happening in there that you can't be? It's not safe. You're not safe inside yourself, right? To be fully you. Because that inner child is always about, that inner wounding, that lack of safety, the lack of security, the lack of confidence.
Yes.
It's not okay to be me, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think that's really important, because
Yeah.
I do think when we're not able or willing to be ourselves, it really is because of fear of of maybe being abandoned, maybe being left, maybe
Rejected, hurt.
rejected,
Yeah.
right? Not accepted, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's those core needs of safety and belonging are at risk if and I do think that we really do need to go back to you know understanding more that is what is at the core of inauthentic living.
Right. Exactly. Versus it being like necessarily a malicious thing, is
Right.
how can we just see it as somebody, is not a full grown up, they're not fully developed, so to speak, inside themselves to a place where they can really fully, confidently, emotionally and mentally show up as
So
yeah,
so let's give our listeners some
yeah,
suggestion on if they find themselves in that situation where they do have some inner child work to do.
yeah,
What's the best way to go about that?
yeah. I there's so many ways to do this. So one of the things I would say is maybe I don't have a book suggestion, but maybe we can look for one. I'm going to just make a note here, Laurel, for a book suggestion on inner child work, because I feel like if right, you have childhood issues that really feel like they're holding you back in a lot of ways in your life, you really want to do some inner child work. And, there's beautiful guided meditations for inner child work. I actually just stumbled across something. It was, oh my gosh, it was so cool. It was actually, I think it was on Facebook because I don't really do much on Instagram right now. And it was an old recording from an early episode from Oprah when she was doing like all the interview shows, when she was doing the afternoon circuit thing. And it was, I don't know who it was, but I probably, if I heard his name, I know it might have been a Bradshaw. Anyway, he was doing a guided meditation with the audience, right? Of going back, go to the earliest memory that you can remember growing up. Go back. Where are you in your home? What are you seeing around you, right? And basically, he was leading them through a process where you were going in as your adult self, taking your inner child from that home and literally taking them out of that home to come with you, to be in your life with you today, right?
Wow.
And it was really, it just reminded me like how beautiful inner child work is and how powerful it can be. And actually how quickly you can make a shift in your life when you claim the responsibility for helping your inner child, not waiting for somebody else to do it, but for you to find the most adult version of yourself to take care of that inner child, and so, yeah, I mean, you can go back. I mean, a great question is go back to the earliest memory that you can have, when you were younger, what was happening around you? What were you doing? What's the first hurt memory that you have, when you were little, right? What upset you when you were growing up in your house that it was hard to be around, it just beginning to do that kind of inventory of the child that grew up and maybe got stuck along the way with some wounds that need to be healed and helped by your more adult version of you now. And if you can't do that work on your own or you're having trouble, like this is bigger than me, go work with somebody who can do the work with you. Right.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to remind our listeners that this is not this is not an area that positive self-talk or affirmations can get you out of, right?
Right.
Like there's so much here that if you recognize some of, your, I'll say, lack of trust in yourself or others coming from somewhere else, it's not the way that you think that is causing that, I'll say, insecurity in relationship, right? It's
Yeah.
something bigger. And so how can you work through that? Because it's not rational.
Right.
I mean, I can know that I'm safe in a relationship or in my home, but maybe there is still a fear of, whether it's being found out, or someone not liking a certain part of me, right? Those aren't rational thoughts.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. And so the inner child work and this deeper work, right, is not about thinking positive thoughts and making it go away. It's not that
No.
simple. Yeah.
No.
Which is why we did the whole episode on nervous system work, because your nervous
Yes,
system is very much involved in this inner child work that we're talking about,
absolutely.
because it's so much about safety. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. And so once you work on growing yourself up, right, is then you really want to be in relationships with other people that are grown-ups that are taking full responsibility for their behavior and their words in a relationship. And if you know that that's not happening in the relationships that you're in, and you don't know how to ask for that, then you're going to be stuck in this loop of disappointment and unhappiness. And we're going to be talking about that, in
Yes.
our next
Yeah.
episode. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about a journal exercise, or, I hate to think of it as homework, but follow up as, to our listeners, when you take inventory of your relationships, right, I want you to think about which relationships feel what I'm going to call nourishing from a trust perspective, right?
Yeah.
Which do you feel you are showing up as yourself and you trust that you always will be able to? And which relationships, are the relationships that you trust deeply? You have trust in the relationship as an entity and in the other person you're in relationship with, and really focus on what does it feel like, right? And I don't often mean the emotional feeling, but the physical feeling, right?
Yeah.
How does it feel in your body,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because I do think that what I like to call embodied self-awareness, which is where I've done a lot of my coaching training in.
Yeah.
But the embodied self-awareness of what trust feels like in your body, then you can know that feeling and use that as an indicator, whether you're entering into a new relationship. And, if you could have something telling you, no, you're on point, right? This is a good relationship. It may be the sensory perception of that relationship and how you physically feel. Maybe it's your vibration. Maybe it's your breathing. Maybe it's your nervous system. You have messages coming from your body.
That's rich. That's good. That's really good. And I think it comes back to kind of like that foundational connection with yourself, so you know what you're looking for. What does trust feel like, and what does that, how is that registering in your being, in your body, so that you really understand what that feeling feels like. Yeah, that's great. And the only other thing that I want to add in here, and I know we might have started with this, but I have to end with it, because I do, it's really strong with me, and maybe it has to do with, where I am with some clients right now, but it just feels like, to just go back to, are you, when you say you're going to do something, are you doing it? So even just looking at how you run your day, how you manage your day. Do you have a plan for your day? Do you use a calendar? Do you stick to the time you say you're going to do? Like, what are you doing with that? Right? Because to me, this is like the small stuff that adds up to the whole, Yeah. Yeah. So just take inventory there and see how you're doing. And if you feel like you're off the rails, like, okay, get some help if you need to get some help, or just start small,
Well, I'm going to take that and add it to be a grown up, because one of the things that erodes my personal self-trust is my bedtime, right? I'd like to believe that I give myself a bedtime.
Yeah.
but I don't.
Mm.
Right. And there are days when I say, "Oh, I'm tired. I need to go to bed early tonight."
Yeah.
And next thing I know, I'm staying up like a teenager whose parents aren't home. Right.
Mm.
And so
Mm.
something,
Yeah.
we all, I'm assuming,
Yeah.
please tell me I'm not the only one. But, there are areas in life that we know things are good for us and we want to show up that way. And for some reason, whether it's habitual behavior or tendencies, whatever it might be,
Yeah.
right? How can you build your self trust by being a grown up? And for me, giving myself a bedtime.
That's right. Time for bed. Set an alarm, stick to the alarm, right? Like, how do we do this? How do we actually do it, right? When we have only ourselves to be accountable to. So we can, like you said, change your mind at the last minute. But, is that really going to make you feel good, right? That's the problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Ooh, Laurel, I guess we have to wrap it up, but
We
boy,
do.
this is a big topic and one that is so foundational, right? To feeling like you have a beautiful life. If you have trusting, beautiful, healthy, trusting relationships, whew,
Yes,
it's a beautiful thing.
it really is.
Yeah.
Yes, because life is full of relationships.
Yeah.
And our relationship with ourselves is so important for a beautiful life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right,
Well,
off we go. Bye for now, everybody. Good luck with
thanks.
your trusting relationship with yourself. We're here for you if you need help with that.
Yes.
Yeah.
See you next time.
All right. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.